Okay, so we all love the transformed wife. And of course, she regularly goes on rants about how women shouldn't vote. It's a terrible thing that women vote. Women, if they're going to vote, should only vote as their husband does, etc. So let's see what Paul and Morgan make of this.
Like, obviously you have, we're just going to call them the haters that maybe come after us, come after Girl Defined, come after Nathan Sutton, and sure enough, oh, they're coming after the transformed wife. But then you also have Christians who aren't the biggest fans of her.
Correct. Indeed you do.
And so I just wanted to ask, before we pull up her tweet from the other day regarding, I think she kind of tweeted it in response to the midterm elections that did not produce the red wave that many were hoping for. Many conservatives, obviously. The Dems are happy. But yeah, Morgan, before we get to that, how do we feel overall about the transformed wife as fellow Christians? Choose your words. Choose your words. Because there are people watching this that are gonna, if you say something wrong.
That's the story of my life.
Hi, it's me. I'm the problem.
Yeah, I would agree with Morgan in the sense of, I'll be honest, you guys, like, I actually appreciate a good amount of what she posts. Hate it or love it. What are you going to do, haters? I do. I appreciate a good amount of what she posts because what she stands for. I believe the world, in particular feminism, creeping in to church, the church culture has gotten so rampant that her voice is actually refreshing at times. However, I get a little concerned when I see posts that she makes that she comes across so confident of, here's what I'm saying. I'm so confident. This is so black and white. And if you're not subscribing to this way of thinking, like what I'm posting here, you're in sin. That's kind of how it feels. Or you're not following the Bible. When in reality, is that truly what the Bible says?
If it isn't the pot calling the kettle black. What are all of your videos, your Christian responses to XYZ, and you have an opinion on those things that is supposedly the biblical way, and those that disagree with you are not the right Christian, not actually Christian, or just not interpreting the Bible right. So, which is it? Can people be authoritative on Christianity and the Bible, or are you all just kind of making it up as you go along?
Again, she's kind of made posts similar to this, and it's the idea of women. You still thankful that women became allowed to vote? You see what happened in the midterm elections where women, and even in the past, they vote overwhelmingly for Democrats and for abortion. You guys happy?
Yeah, she might have like somewhat of a biblical argument as to like saying what she's saying. She does have a biblical argument to saying like women shouldn't be voting.
Oh, whoa, wait, hold on. Did I just hear that correctly?
But listen, I think that it's ridiculous that she's arguing this because women can vote. That's that.
All right, Morgan, let me see if I can keep this straight. So, because it's the law of the land and has been for so long, women can vote and women have the right to a vote because that's how it is. Could we not also apply that to allowing reproductive freedom because it had been the law of the land for 50 years? Just a thought, if there's other things that have been the law of the land for a really long time, and that's just how it is, even if it isn't necessarily biblical, but we should keep going with it because that's just the way it is. That seems very antithetical to claiming that women need to make sure that they are voting biblically, and men need to be voting biblically, men need to be men, women need to be women. Have you really thought that through? Or is it just that you want to support the rights that you enjoy and that you appreciate and that you find valuable, and you want to take away rights that you do not see as valuable, rights that you do not personally want to exercise.
She does perhaps have a biblical argument
There might be a biblical argument
of women maybe
not voting.
not voting, but because women already can vote, now she's just kind of poking a bear that she doesn't need to.
Yes.
The second,
I don't know if there is. I'm just saying there might be. I'm saying I'm sure she's not just like pulling this out of her butt. We live in a day and age where women can vote, and that's not going to be taken away.
Morgan, I like
Hopefully.
Okay, so there is a biblical basis, or there might be a biblical basis, or you have no clue. You say that she's not just pulling it out of thin air, but are you pulling it out of thin air?
The 2018 midterm elections are a good example. That year, according to the exit polls, 59% of women and only 47% of men voted Democrat, which means the gender gap was historically wide at nearly 12 percentage points. And then something else here is kind of interesting. This was actually super interesting in my opinion. In 2018 and 2019, the Democratic Party held a wide advantage with women. 56% of female registered voters identified as Democrats, blah, blah, blah. So 56%, that's not like a ridiculous amount, but it does say, while 38% identified as Republicans are leaned toward the GOP. So actually 56% Democrat, 38% Republican, that is a pretty significant. That's pretty stinking significant. And then this I thought was also really interesting. Listen to this. It's talking about among educated women that have gone and gotten a bachelor's degree or more. Here we go, guys. Listen to this, because I think this is worth talking about. And I also don't just want to stay on like the topic of women voting. I want to get into Gen Z voting, because Gen Z is another one that's like, okay, what's happening here? But listen to this. Men and women with a bachelor's degree or more education are significantly more democratic in their orientation than 25 years ago. Still, listen to this, college-educated women, 65%, were much more likely than college-educated men, 48%, to identify as Democrats in 2018 and 2019. Among less educated voters, the Democratic Party holds an edge with women, 51%. So these are, I guess, without going to college, it goes from 65% to 51%. What is college doing to women? It's turning them Democrats.
Sure as heck isn't educating them.
All right, let's talk about why women tend to vote Democrat. Now, initially, when we got the right to vote after 1920, state ballot restrictions like literary tests and poll taxes actually kept a lot of Indigenous Americans, Black Americans, other immigrants, the poor, people who didn't have a lot of education in English and in American government and history. Those people were excluded from the vote. Once they got the right to vote, they became a very strong voting bloc for the Progressive Party, which for a while was the Republicans, and then around the 1960s, 1970s, and definitely by 1980, they had made a major change, and then the Republicans were the conservatives, and the Democrats were the progressives. This largely surrounded the rise of the moral majority. They wanted to make voting a moral issue. So you're not just voting about laws and policies and constitutions. All of those things have a moral judgment to them. And so they were saying that things like the Equal Rights Amendment or reproductive freedom, those things were immoral, and so therefore you should not vote for them. The Democrats, on the other hand, embraced those things and elected more and more women to offices, and so therefore women tended to vote more for them. People will vote for the party and the candidates that are supporting policies and beliefs and values that will benefit their lives. Like, that's the whole point of government, is to benefit our lives. It is to kind of administrate and create a structure that then allows us to live our lives more freely. So a lot of this I'm getting from Smithsonian, just FYI, cite my sources. So by the 1960 presidential election, the turnout gap between men and women had shrunk to 10 percentage points, meaning that only 10% more men were voting than women. They found that as successive generations went about voting, the first ones that were given the right to vote had social mores or family controversies or whatever that would keep them from voting because it hadn't historically been a thing that they did. Now, successive generations, as they have had those rights longer and longer, are more likely to exercise them. So in recent years, it has been a massive increase in how many women are voting. So in the 1950s and the 1960s, policy differences between women and men, such as women's greater opposition to the Korean War, did not translate into differences in vote choice because the parties did not distinguish themselves on these issues. But soon after, women's lives began to change profoundly. The Supreme Court legalized birth control and reproductive freedom. Congress acted on equal rights, passing Title IX of the Higher Education Act in 1972 and the Pregnancy Discrimination Act in 1978. So again, we have people putting forth policies, legislations, values that are respecting women and the things that, the obstacles that they come across in life. So when those politicians adequately respond to those obstacles, people are going to vote for them. It's not rocket science. So it was in 1980 that women began turning out more than men, and they also favored Reagan less than men. So 47% of women favored Reagan versus 55% of men that favored Reagan. So it was at that point that the contemporary gender gap came into play. In 2016, women voters preferred Hillary Clinton 13 points more than men. Conversely, they disliked Trump more than men. 41% of men disliked Trump and 52% of women disliked Trump. Especially when it comes to people of color, Hillary Clinton got 90% of the women of color vote. That is huge, and that should tell you something. Again, it's not rocket science. People vote for politicians that are going to advocate for their issues. And then also in recent elections, women have been much more likely to vote than men. It is something like 53% of men who are eligible to vote will vote, and it's like 67% of women that are eligible to vote will vote. Now, that is far below what it should be in a democratic republic as we are. We need more than 2/3 of the populace to vote. We really, really do. There are so many people that opt out of voting because they don't like the options, and they don't seem to recognize that not voting is basically giving someone else your vote. So, vote, people.
Elementary school up, but I'd say more like middle school up, especially high school and college. Like, it's just it's indoctrination, in my opinion, of just like this weird leftist, selfish life beliefs and whatnot.
I agree. Isn't it interesting that the difference between perhaps like college educated women versus men? And to me, I'm kind of like, not only is there just this kind of leftist liberal indoctrination, and if you asked people that are observing things, they would say, yeah, the Democrats have more control over the school systems and what kids are being taught. Homeschool your kids. Homeschool your kids.
This is completely unsurprising. The right has been demonizing public education for my entire life, and I'm over 40. So it is really not a hot take to say that you need to homeschool your kids in order to make sure that they turn out conservatives. But I want to just say, as a little anecdotal research, my parents were extremely conservative Christians when it came to politics. And when I voted for the first time when I was 18, I voted for George Bush. I'm sorry. But after I started deconstructing a year or two later, I almost immediately changed my party affiliation. I became a Democrat in, I think, 2002, 2003, something like that, before the 2004 election for sure. But, so I'm a hardcore liberal, right? My brother, who is still somewhat a Christian, but he's certainly done his own deconstruction. He is a hardcore liberal. He really wants to see people like Bernie Sanders in office. He really wants to see extremely progressive policies and definitely supports women's right to choose. And then you have my sister. She's still very much a Christian, but she is libertarian. So she usually votes for the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the Constitutional Party, something like that. But literally, out of 3 kids that were homeschooled all the way through school with a religious indoctrination throughout all of that, who went to Christian universities, we still came out hardcore liberals, or the one who's kind of middle of the road. But 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? So it's not just the public school system. It is people experiencing life and recognizing that the black and white ideals that we are given through religious indoctrination do not hold up to actual nuanced life. Life is a whole lot of gray. There is hardly any black and white. Most everything is gray.
Women are more emotional and emotionally moldable, and you tell a woman that her rights are being taken away and you pour out a sob story of like how we're losing our freedoms, women are gonna eat that up.
They're gonna
Okay, I'm gonna try really hard not to laugh through this part. Girl, what do you think happened when the Republicans were crying about Obama's gonna get your guns? Did that not drive men, Republican men, to the voting booth? Whenever anybody tells a group that they are going to have rights taken away, they freak out. Because it's scary to get your rights taken away. When you are used to a certain standard of living and certain legal principles and structures that support you in living that way, when any of those go away, it's going to be a major issue for you. It doesn't matter if you're a man, a woman, a conservative, a progressive, does not matter. Whenever anyone tells you and has a valid case for your rights being taken away, people are going to respond accordingly. This is not rocket science. But no, you gotta boil it down to women are just more emotional. Pardon me while we talk about the men that have had to appear in court or in front of the Congress and whatnot. All of these right-wing guys losing their shit while they're in, 45 minutes of deposition. And then you have Hillary Clinton, who sat through, 11, 13 hours of interrogation, and she was calm, cool-headed. She was very methodical and thoughtful in everything that she said. She held herself together. Every woman that has ever had to testify to Congress or to the Supreme Court, they have been exemplary in controlling their emotions and thinking about things rationally and with a lot of evidence to back up their beliefs. So, I mean, you want to talk about emotional? Drumpf! Y'all love Trump, and he is as emotional as it gets. Come on. Come on.
Generation Z is generally alike to millennials, close, on political and social issues. Generation Z has been reported to be progressive and pro-government. Though this narrative has been challenged, particularly in Europe, the generation is largely in favor of LGBT rights, gender equality, and access to abortion. And then in a Time article, it says, the youngest voting generation is strongly pro-choice and can be mobilized by, what you were just saying, by threats to reproductive health care. Our September poll of Gen Z voters of color in battleground states found that 87% supported abortion rights. And in our national poll with Urge, following the leak of the Dobbs versus Jackson decision in May, 65%, this is just of all Gen Z voters, according to this poll, 65% of Gen Z voters reported that abortion access was an important part of their decision to go vote. So,
okay, so this is two things, really. So Gen Z has that historical access to reproductive freedom. They historically have access to vote. And honestly, they historically have access to recreational cannabis. Like, what they are used to having is more than my generation, my parents' generation were used to having. And so, like I was saying, if somebody tells a group that their rights are being taken away, they are going to respond accordingly. So Gen Z is looking at all of these things that have historically been theirs as they were approaching adulthood, or, you know, would be theirs as an adult as they're approaching adulthood, and then they become adults, and suddenly there's people trying to take it away. Yes, they're going to vote for it. This is not rocket science. Also, the Gen Z is so poor by comparison to previous generations. Like, even compared to mine, like, they have so much less to look forward to in the way of home ownership or being able to have a family and afford it. Most of them spend their lives living at home for years longer than previous generations have. Why? Because the economic landscape is so different. Wages have stagnated for decades, while executive profits and corporate profits are just exponential year over year. So they are going to be much more concerned with things that are going to impact their ability to afford life. And a big part of that is kids. These two knuckleheads don't really know because they grift everything, but most of us have to pay for stuff. We have to pay for birth. We have to pay for prenatal care because we actually get prenatal care. Most of us pay for hospital deliveries. There's a lot of medical care that happens with kids. Kids are so prone to getting sick and hurting themselves. Like, it's a thing. And so kids are expensive. You've got food for the kids, schooling for the kids, even if you're going to homeschool. That's not an easy thing to do on the pocketbook unless you're going to do it like Carissa and just exemplify educational neglect. And that is not what we should be aiming for, and that's definitely not what Gen Z is trying to do with their lives. So yes, of course Gen Z is going to vote for things that are going to help them succeed in life. Not rocket science.
I would agree. I would say it's also just a significant byproduct of coming up through the school system. And there is just this effort, demasculate men, masculate women. Make women the leaders, make them feminists. And so, yeah, you add all that together.
They don't want to hear this from me because I'm non-binary. I am assigned female at birth, but I do not identify as a woman. But the masculation that I went through did not happen to me as a child. I was raised hyper feminine as a child. It wasn't until I got into high school and had a little bit more control of how I dressed and how I presented. I still had to wear dresses to church, but most of the time I could wear pants, and I absolutely did that. It was the 90s, so I loved my overalls, and I wore a lot of, unisex clothes. I actually got a lot of sweaters from the guys section because I liked the patterns, That wasn't me trying to be masculated. That was just me finding the clothes that I liked how I looked in. It's really not that complicated. I do not associate with a lot of things that are stereotypically feminine, that are socially accepted in America as feminine. I just don't. And so I don't identify as a female. And we're allowed to make those choices. And it's not about masculating or emasculating. It's about people being true to themselves. And that has been the case for eons. Literally eons. There are historical records of people from hundreds and hundreds of years ago that were gender non-conforming. We have pantomimes that have been very popular in military scenarios, where it's a bunch of guys out there, and so they have to have some entertainment on the battlefield, and so guys dress up as women. Did that turn them femme? No, it did not, because that's not how they saw themselves. It was just a character that they were playing. In the same way, when I was being forced to dress hyper feminine, it felt like a costume that I was putting on. I was putting on this fake mask of woman in order to fit in. And people have been bravely bucking those standards of cis-normativity forever. Forever. This is not something new. This is not the fault of the public school system. This has been going on long before public school system was a thing.
This is a way to honor our husbands since God made them head over us. And in my poll, I said, wives should vote like their husbands or not vote. And then I said, she speaks wisdom or she's going too far. And it got a 30-70% split there. 70% thought she was going too far. 30% said she speaks wisdom. Morgan, thoughts on that? I, for one, am glad that women are voting. To me, it's not so much this deep, underlying issue that it seems like she has, which is just that women, based off the hierarchy that God created, women shouldn't be voting. I don't really see that so much as I just want to get to the reason of why so many women are voting Democrat.
Let's refer back to a little earlier in the video. Again, this is not rocket science. Women do not want to be oppressed. Most women do not want to be trad wives. They do not want to have a marriage that is a headship and submission. They want an equal partnership. They want someone who is going to equally contribute to household chores, to child rearing, to bringing in the bacon. They want something that is a partnership of equals, not a matter of a woman being led by a man. So, y'all really want to hang on to this incredibly archaic structure. And if you want to do that in your specific relationship, have at it, Haas. But you can't force everyone else to want that same thing. It's just not going to happen. I don't care how many people you convert to Christianity, you're still going to have a significant block of people that want egalitarian relationships. Even with my parents, who were extremely conservative and in the independent Baptist sort of section of Protestantism, and I mean that includes the IFB and IBLP, they're a little bit more to the right than my parents were, but they were in that world, and even they wanted an egalitarian relationship. They have had a very successful marriage for 42, 43 years now, largely because they had had an egalitarian relationship. So it might work for you, and that's great. God bless. But you can't expect every woman out there to dream of that same type of marriage.